half the strips on the side complete, and you can see that I use bicycle tire tubes, strips of bicycle tire tubes, stretched around all the strips and clamped, and they create a good bonding pressure, especially if you're doing it stapleless design, which I am. But even if you were stapling it, say at the posts and that, you would still need some pressure in between the posts and that, and they provide great downward pressure on the strips while they're drying. So I finished putting the last strip of red cedar on the boat. I'm going to now be cutting up basswood and continue on up to the top of the railings with basswood. That'll give it a nice contrast, the dark red versus a very much of a white color. So it should look okay. So I have my first strip of cherry steam bent and placed into position. This is at the front of the barrel. After I do a couple more strips, I'll show you the process, because this is basically a make it up as you go type process, whatever I find works. And this one seemed to go on quite nicely, and so I'll try another one, and then I'll tell you how I do it. So this is my homemade steamer, and it's just an old kettle, and I put a fitting on top and a PVC pipe, and I just stick the piece of cherry in. So I could only steam one end at a time, so it's not like a steam box. If I had a real steam box, that would be the best thing, I guess, but I don't. So I just do one end at a time. So the first piece of cherry has been sitting on the bow part, and I guess you'd call it the jig, but it's actually part of the bow. Anyways, for about 15 minutes while the next piece is steaming. And the next piece I'm just going to be quickly putting in place and clamping, and you can see that the clamps now, it doesn't require much pressure to hold it in place. So I should be able to remove those clamps and force the other piece in there without too much difficulty. So the second piece has now been put into place, and it seemed to go in quite nicely. That's what I have to do next. I'll have to steam this end, but in order to steam this end, I've got to keep this end under tension so it doesn't lose its bend. And so I'm going to add a little piece of my tire tube that I use for wrapping around strips, and use that to keep this in tension. So you can see I have my tire tube, the strip of tire tube, stretched down to hold the piece I had just bent in tension. And this is while I'm steaming the other end. So I'm going to let it steam for about 15 minutes, and then I will try putting it on. And here's the other end all clamped into place, and it went in really smoothly. The other end I still haven't taken out of tension yet, and I'm now going to do that and clamp it back into place. So now this end has been taken out of tension and clamped right back into place, and so now I have two strips And so the next part of the process will be to laminate those two strips together, and then I will continue on after they're laminated together. I'll give them 24 hours to dry, and then I'll add the next strip, and so on. So it's a slow process, but perhaps I could speed that up somewhat. I'm not sure, but I take it one step at a time. So the first two pieces of the railing system that are steam bent, and I have now glued them together. Lots of clamps to keep it straight, keep them clamped together, and I'm going to let them dry for 24 hours and then proceed to add the third strip, fourth strips, etc. So a long process, but I'm just being cautious at first. So these are the two pieces of the bow rail that are steam bent and laminated together, and they came out very nice. So the process now will bend the third one, glue it on, then do a fourth and fifth and so on, and build up the thickness of the railing to I'd like it to be about 3 inches, and we'll play it by ear. So this is my steaming process I have set up. I'm steaming the last strip I need for the bow rail, and this is the bow rail that I have assembled so far. I've got to do a couple touch-ups on it, plane it, router the edges, epoxy it, sand it, and then it'll be ready for varnishing. And then I will put it back in place and connect it with the other railings when I have them complete. I usually steam the strips for 15 minutes per end, and when you go to bend them around the railing, you have to bend slowly, but you have to do it fairly quickly as well. So that's the process. You got to get it out of the steamer into place, but don't snap it as you go around, bend it around. You have to bend it smoothly, slowly, so you don't snap it. So far I've only broke one. So I got a coat of epoxy on the bow rail, and it sealed it pretty good. It needs to be sanded and repeated. You can see right here where the laminations, when I laminated with the wood glue, because it's under stress, it's separated. You should keep it clamped for about 24 hours with the wood glue. Anyways, I had to mix up some epoxy and filler and put in place, do a little repair job there. Other spots you can see where the epoxy has seeped into the seams between the wood strips, and I'll have to sand that and reapply some epoxy. I just finished glassing the bow, and it came out pretty good. Just have to trim the glass off after. I'll have to put about 2 thin coats of epoxy resin on it, build up above the weave, then sand it, and then it's ready for varnishing. So I have the second coat of epoxy on the bow. It's looking pretty good now. It's going to require probably 2 more thin coats of epoxy. Then I'll have to sand it, and then it'll be ready for varnishing. So I have the first and second piece steamed and glued together for the rear railing, and I'm going to follow the same process as I did on the bow and laminate about 11 of them together. So for the stern rail, I've started laminating that in place, and I'm leaving it clamped for 24 hours for every time I glue a strip on, and keeping it well clamped just to prevent it separating where the planks are under stress. So I have the bow rail temporarily placed where it should go. I've got it screwed down. Eventually it'll get epoxied down, but I don't want to epoxy it down until the entire railing system is complete, in case I have to do minor adjustments. The stern rail is completely laminated now. As soon as the glue dries, I'll be able to start sanding that down, routering it, epoxying it, and get it ready. And for the side rails, they will be next. Well, I have both side rails laminated together, and these are a lot simpler. There's no steaming involved, just laminating. So this one here is on the starboard side, and I'll be sanding this down next and routering the edges, and then epoxying it. So I have the starboard railing system finished and snapped into place. So all the railing systems are done. They still have to be epoxied in place. And I now also have done all the routering or the beading cove on the basswood pieces. So I had the first piece of basswood at the stern glued in, and the entire sides will be basswood from there on up.